Hello, my name is Geraldine Emans and I'm a teacher of ESOL and Nurture. I'm going to be looking at the question, does immersion risk desertion of individual pupil needs for EAL learners? I'm going to touch on the diversity within the migrant EAL learner community, and by EAL I mean English as an additional language. I'm going to touch on the needs within that community for their bilingualism to be supported, their social and emotional needs to be acknowledged and supported, and their additional support needs that are not related to the acquisition of English to also be identified and supported. I'm also going to briefly mention some suggestions and questions around strategies that are required to support EAL learners. EAL learners have an additional support needs by virtue of the fact that they are acquiring English. EAL learners have unique needs. If you've met one EAL learner, you've met one EAL learner. They are a diverse population of learners and they differ greatly in their levels of literacy in their home language, in their conversational fluency in English, and in their developed literacies for reading and writing. So when I hear diversity, I'm inclined to think of differentiation and thereby additional support needs, removal of barriers and improving inclusion and equality in the classroom. And it is the issue of equality that has led to, I think, the avoidance of extraction, possibly even a fear of extraction of EAL learners from the mainstream classroom for targeted support, as it may be perceived or regarded as direct discrimination on the basis of race due to the fact that EAL learners are migrants. While inclusive practice is well intended in principle, it does mean that this integration of EAL learners is inadvertently giving rise to, or at least is correlated with, a disintegration of specialised support and provision for the acquisition of English in a targeted and tailored approach. Unfortunately, the aimed for targeted and tailored approach is not always practiced in the classroom, and moreover teachers are not routinely supplied with the continuous professional learning opportunities for access to EAL classroom support as an essential component to their teaching toolkit. And instead there is this hope that immersion in and of itself will be largely a one-size-fits-all approach to serving the purpose of facilitating the acquisition of English for EAL learners. EAL learners are aiming to learn English as an objective by itself, but also to access the curriculum content via the medium of English, which is a language they haven't fully developed. For some, they are in the early acquisition stage. In addition to their need to have their language supported and instructed, I feel there are other needs of EAL learners that deserve consideration but do not often get talked about. The first is their need to have their bilingualism or home language supported. Again, the additional support for Learning Act states that schools have a key role in maximising the potential of bilingual learners. This would suggest in practice the provision for children to pursue qualifications in their home language. It might assume a culture that cultivates the use of 2+ languages and evidence of strategic support to utilise home languages to instruct the curriculum, because this would be utilising pupil strengths in order to access the curriculum and therefore raise attainment. From my own experience, there is a lack of opportunities to develop literacy for EAL pupils in their home languages. Neither is bilingualism recognised overtly as a strength. Home languages are used in the classroom, though this is used through mutual EAL learner cooperation to overcome barriers, not for routine instruction. EAL learners also have a need to be socially included and have social interaction. Sadly, linguistic isolation breeds social isolation. EAL learners are regularly limited and lacking in opportunities for social interaction and therefore friendships. It's actually usually through ESOL, teaching English for speakers of other languages, that pupils meet their first and only friends, who are other migrant children acquiring English. EAL pupils, however, don't get assigned to ESOL classes until the senior phase in secondary school, which might mean a long, lonely wait for friendships to develop. Some schools use the buddy system, while others use EAL groups in order to help children socially integrate, but this is at the discretion of the school and it's not standard practice. I think we need to give due consideration to how we can, as investors in the needs of migrant children, how we allow migrant children to feel socially integrated and included, as it is connectedness that links to positive health and well-being, which also is important for emotional well-being, which links to the next need. So one of the nurture principles is transitions are important in the lives of children, and there are multiple transitions in the lives of migrant children. Surely this will have created considerable levels of stress, and this is especially worse for adolescents, as they already have the stress of being adolescents. On top of which, the trauma of any experience prior to or during and post-migration, especially for refugees and asylum seekers, has to be considered. Plus, very often EAL pupils are often the translators and interpreters for parents who don't actually speak English. I think it's important to consider, how do EAL pupils report and access support for their emotional well-being? In a similar vein, how do we allow for identification and support for additional support needs that aren't EAL related? It's also important that EAL pupils are immersed into appropriately challenging classrooms and that their progress is monitored regularly. Similarly, teachers need to be able to look beyond the language barrier and be able to identify other signs of additional support needs such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD and ASD, and be able to ask themselves if they're able to assess pupil understanding through a range of modes, particularly if certain pupils are rather shy or refuse to speak. I think it's important to reflect if we're actually assessing pupils accurately for additional support needs, particularly those that are not EAL in origin. So in terms of individualised support required, I believe there needs to be more one-to-one or small group work to allow for the tailoring of individual targeted support. I think it's important that pupils are allowed to develop their first language, that there's a culture of 2+ languages in schools, that school buddy systems or EAL groups are routinely incorporated to enhance social integration, and that there is appropriate sharing of access for emotional support for EAL learners, and that there is a monitoring and reviewing process for possible additional support needs that are not EAL in origin. Research may wish to include a review of or trialling of individual supports for learners across a range of educational settings. I would like to finish by reflecting on the following. Immersion works when individual pupils are supported in the classroom setting. I don't see equality and inclusion in the case of EAL learners happening organically with immersion alone. Both need to be cultivated through appropriate targeted and tailored provision for individual pupils. Thank you.